I died, and Jesus showed me the final 3 years of earth. Ethan Carter's life had always been a mix of routine and uncertainty. Growing up in a Christian home, he had been taught the principles of faith, but as he entered adulthood, those teachings began to feel more like distant echoes than guiding truths. He was married to Sarah, a devout woman who found comfort and purpose in her faith. Yet for Ethan, belief had become something he could neither embrace nor completely let go of. There were too many questions, too many things that didn't make sense in the world for him to just accept it all without proof. His days were filled with work, small talk, and quiet moments of introspection where doubts would creep in. He went to church with Sarah out of respect, but it had been years since he'd felt anything close to a connection with God. He didn't want to hurt Sarah, but their differing views on faith created a silent tension between them. Ethan wanted answers, something that would make him understand why he felt so disconnected from the spiritual world. Then, everything changed in an instant. What started as a regular day spiraled into an event that would upend everything Ethan thought he knew about life, death, and faith. Before we dive into Ethan's extraordinary journey, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment below where you're watching from. I never expected something like this to happen. It wasn't supposed to be my story. But then there I was, standing on the edge of something that would change everything. It all began with a simple, ordinary night that turned into the most extraordinary experience of my life. I had been feeling off for weeks, nothing serious, just the kind of exhaustion that comes from juggling work, home, and the constant hum of a life that felt too busy for its own good. I brushed it off, thinking it was just stress, but I was wrong. It happened suddenly. One moment I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep, and the next, I was sinking into an abyss. No warning, no gradual descent, just darkness. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move, and then nothing. When I woke up, I was no longer in my room. I wasn't even on Earth. I was standing in a vast field with light streaming from every direction. The air was pure, like I was breathing something that wasn't even from this world. I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was, but there were no buildings, no cars, no sounds of the world I knew. Then I saw him, Jesus. He was standing just ahead of me, looking at me with a deep, compassionate gaze. He didn't speak at first, and I felt like I was in the presence of someone who knew everything about me, every secret, every question, every doubt I had ever carried. "Follow me," he said, his voice soft but filled with authority. Without thinking, I took a step forward, and just like that, everything around me began to shift. I was no longer standing on a quiet field. Instead, I was suddenly standing in the middle of a scene. No, it wasn't a scene. It was a vision of earth. I watched in shock and disbelief as Jesus showed me what was to come, the final 3 years of humanity's existence. It wasn't a dream or a mere glimpse. It felt like I was actually there, experiencing it. I saw chaos, cities crumbling, nations at war, people falling into despair. But there were moments, brief but beautiful, where light pierced the darkness. Small groups of faithful, clinging to hope, refusing to let go of the truth. At that moment, I wanted to scream. My mind was racing. Why am I seeing this? What does this mean? But all I could do was watch in silence as the vision unfolded. I saw moments of deep suffering, but I also saw moments of grace and transformation. People's lives changed in an instant when they realized what was at stake. The truth that so many had dismissed suddenly became undeniable. And then Jesus spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "You will carry this truth. Share it, for time is running out." Before I could ask more questions, the vision began to fade. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, lying in my own bed. My heart was pounding, my body drenched in sweat. It took me a few moments to even comprehend what had just happened. Have I really seen that? Or was it just some vivid dream? But deep inside, I knew it was real. What I had just experienced was not just some random occurrence. It was a message, and now I had to figure out what to do with it. Was I ready for this? Could I embrace what I had seen, or would I continue to live in denial? The truth had found me, and I had no idea what to do next. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't unsee it, and that terrified me. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and turmoil. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen, but at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to fully accept it. It felt like a truth too big for my mind to handle. I kept trying to push it aside, to go back to living my normal life, but the weight of that vision clung to me, pulling me deeper into a storm I wasn't prepared for. When Sarah asked me what had happened, I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell your wife that you've just seen the end of the world, that you've been shown things that no one should know? The look in her eyes when I told her I was fine, that everything was okay, was filled with worry. She couldn't understand what was happening to me. She only knew that I had changed. I couldn't find the words to describe it to her, and I hated myself for it. She believed in God with every ounce of her being, and I couldn't even give her a fraction of that belief. The more I tried to convince her that everything was normal, the more I felt like I was lying to myself. I wasn't the man she had married anymore. David, my oldest friend, was no help either. When I confided in him about the vision, he looked at me like I was crazy. "You've lost your mind, Ethan. You really believe this stuff? That's not you." His voice was filled with a mixture of disbelief and mockery, but there was something else too, fear. Fear of what I was becoming. I tried to reassure him, to laugh it off like it was just some bizarre dream, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was more than that. It was real. And it was changing me in ways I didn't understand. I wanted to reach out to David for support, but all I got was resistance. His skepticism pushed me further into isolation. Pastor John, on the other hand, was the only one who didn't dismiss me entirely. When I went to him for guidance, he listened quietly, without judgment, but there was a hesitation in his eyes. He didn't know how to handle what I was telling him. After all, it wasn't the typical testimony of someone finding God. It was about something much bigger, much more urgent. "Ethan," he said slowly, "sometimes God moves in ways we don't understand. What you saw, it's difficult to comprehend, but I believe God is calling you to something. You need to pray on this and let Him guide you." But how could I pray? How could I find peace when everything inside me was a storm? How could I ask for guidance when I wasn't even sure what I was supposed to be doing? I started to pull away from everyone. Church no longer felt like a place of comfort. It felt foreign, like I was an outsider looking in. Every sermon I heard, every prayer I recited felt empty in comparison to what I had experienced. I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more I realized just how much I didn't understand. I wasn't just questioning my faith, I was questioning everything. Who was I now? And who had I been before? My old life, my old self, didn't seem to fit anymore. I was drifting in a sea of doubt, unable to anchor myself to anything solid. But one thing kept pulling me forward, the vision, the truth. It was undeniable, and I couldn't ignore it. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about something much bigger than I could ever understand. And I was scared. It wasn't until one night, alone in my study, that I finally felt like I could breathe again. I had been praying, or at least I had been trying to. It felt like the words weren't enough, like I was speaking into a void, but still, I pushed myself to keep going. I had to find peace. I had to know what this vision meant for my life. And then it happened. I was sitting there praying when the air around me grew cold. The room darkened and I felt it. Someone or something was there. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the presence was unmistakable. I looked up and to my shock, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It wasn't Jesus, not the way he had appeared to me in my vision, but it was something else. Something dark. The figure stepped forward and I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't hostile, but it was a warning. It didn't speak with words, but the message was clear. You are not ready for the truth. The world you think you know is not what it seems. The path you're on is leading you into the very deception you fear. I froze, unable to move or speak. A wave of fear swept over me. I had heard of the spiritual battles that people face, but I never thought I'd be caught in one myself. And yet, there it was, this dark presence that seemed to exist between the realms of heaven and earth. In that moment, something shifted within me. The vision of the end of the world, the chaos and despair, came rushing back, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just a warning about what was to come, it was a warning about me. about my soul. The dark figure seemed to be pushing me away from the truth I had seen, urging me to ignore it, to go back to the life I knew, the life of doubt and complacency. The more I tried to focus on that moment, the clearer the truth became. There was a battle for my soul, for my belief, for my purpose. I had seen the vision of the end, but now I understood that there was more at stake than just the fate of the world. It was about me. My choices, my actions, my faith, or lack of it, were going to play a pivotal role in what was to come. Suddenly, I was gripped by the overwhelming realization that the choice was mine. The choice to believe or deny, to accept the truth or continue living in ignorance. The darkness in front of me was a force trying to pull me away from the light that had been revealed to me, and I had to choose which path I would walk. I fell to my knees, shaken by the weight of it all. I knew that if I didn't act soon, if I didn't fully embrace the truth, I would lose everything. The vision I had seen, the truth of what was coming, was not just a warning, it was a call to action, a call to stand firm in the light. But standing firm in that light meant facing the darkness head on. It meant choosing a path that would alienate me from everyone I knew, from my family, my friends, my community. It would mean stepping into something that felt unknown and terrifying. But the alternative? To remain in the shadows, denying what I had seen, was a far greater fear. I knew then that my journey had only just begun, and that the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. The days after that encounter in my study were nothing short of a whirlwind. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, the dark figure, the choice I had to make, the overwhelming realization that the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. But telling Sarah? That felt like an impossible task. I had been struggling to put into words the vision I had seen, but now, after what had happened in that room, I felt even more lost. How could I explain this to her without sounding completely out of my mind? When I finally told her about the encounter with the dark figure, her reaction was not what I had expected. Instead of the worry or confusion I had braced myself for, Sarah's eyes widened in fear. "Ethan, this isn't something you can just ignore," she said, her voice trembling. "You've seen something. You've seen the truth. Don't let anything pull you away from it." But even as she said that, I could see the fear in her eyes. She wanted to believe, but a part of her was still grappling with the same questions that had haunted me for years. Could this really be real? Was I truly being called to something bigger than myself? Could this vision I had seen really be from God? I tried to explain it to her, but the words just weren't enough. There was no way to describe the heaviness that had settled in my heart. The truth that had been revealed to me wasn't just some abstract idea, it was a warning. And yet, no matter how I tried to convey that, she couldn't fully grasp it. The doubt lingered between us like a shadow, making everything feel distant. And then there was David. He became more distant after that night. At first, he didn't say much. He just avoided the topic altogether. But when I pressed him, he finally spoke. "Ethan, you're not the man I used to know. You're acting like you're some sort of prophet or something, and I can't get on board with this." His voice wasn't filled with anger. It was full of sadness, of disappointment. It was clear he didn't understand what was happening to me, and he didn't know how to deal with it. "Are you sure about this? Because if you're not, it's only going to make things worse," David continued, his words cutting through me like a knife. "You can't just jump into this blindly. You can't just leave everything behind and chase after some vision. What if you're wrong?" Those words hit harder than I expected. What if I was wrong? What if I had imagined the whole thing? But I knew deep down that I couldn't turn back. I had seen too much, felt too much, and now I was faced with a decision I couldn't ignore. I didn't want to lose my friends, my family, but I knew that if I stayed silent, if I didn't act, I would lose something far greater, my soul. Pastor John, too, seemed to be walking a fine line with me. His counsel was gentle, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "Ethan, you've had an encounter that changed you, but be careful. People won't understand. They'll question you, they'll criticize you, and it will be hard to stay the course. But you have to be sure of your calling. You have to pray on this every single day." But what did praying even mean now? How could I pray for clarity when everything around me was falling apart? As I watched my relationships fray, Sarah's quiet worry, David's confusion, Pastor John's concern, I realized that embracing this truth, this call I had received, wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be simple. The world I knew was crumbling before me, and I had no idea how to rebuild it. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that whatever happened, I couldn't let go of what I had seen. As I tried to navigate the turmoil in my personal life, I couldn't escape the growing tension in my mind. The more I thought about the vision, the more questions surfaced, questions I couldn't ignore. I had been shown the end of the world, but it wasn't just about the world's fate. It was about my own. I had seen a warning, a call to action, and yet I wasn't sure what that meant for me, for Sarah, or for anyone else I loved. Every moment felt like a struggle between my desire for peace and the unsettling urgency of the truth. But there was something else creeping in. The guilt. The weight of what I had seen had become unbearable, and it was beginning to seep into every part of my life. I started to distance myself from Sarah, knowing that my faith, or my growing understanding of it, was becoming a wedge between us. We had always been close, but now I was holding something from her. I was afraid to share too much, afraid that if I revealed everything, she would think I was losing my mind. She already had enough on her plate without me throwing this mess into the mix. And then there was the community. I hadn't been to church in weeks. Pastor John had told me to pray, to seek guidance, but it felt like a cruel joke. How could I pray when I didn't even know what I was supposed to be praying for? The world I had known was slipping through my fingers, and every time I tried to get a grip on it, I felt like I was falling deeper into uncertainty. The tension with David only grew worse. He kept pushing me to let it go. "This isn't you, Ethan," he would say, as if I could somehow undo what I had seen, as if I could return to the man I had been before. I wanted to tell him that I couldn't go back. I had seen too much, but the words stuck in my throat. It wasn't just the people close to me that were causing a rift. The more I tried to understand the vision, the more I began to question everything. Was I meant to be some kind of messenger? Was I supposed to prepare others for what was coming? Or was I just one more voice in a world full of noise? What good could one man do in a world on the brink of destruction? One evening, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. It was one of those rare moments when the world felt still, before everything started to change. The sky was clouded, the air heavy, and there was a strange stillness in the streets, almost as if the world was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something I couldn't prepare for. And then, just as I passed an old church that had stood there for years, I saw a figure standing at the door. It was a woman I didn't recognize, and yet something about her felt familiar, like I had known her forever. She was staring at me with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. She didn't say a word, but I knew. I knew she was part of this journey, part of the calling I was trying to resist. Her presence was a sign that I wasn't alone in this, that the path I had been shown wasn't as isolated as it seemed. But even as that realization settled within me, I couldn't shake the doubt. Was I meant to follow her? Or was she another challenge, another test to see if I would step into the truth or turn away? With that thought lingering in my mind, I walked away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something that would force me to confront everything I had been avoiding. The days following that strange encounter with the woman by the church were marked by an unsettling tension. I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't fully grasp. It was as if everything I thought I knew was starting to unravel, and I was helpless to stop it. I tried to talk to Sarah about it, to explain how I felt like I was living in a world that no longer made sense. But every time I tried, the words felt like they weren't enough. I don't understand, Ethan, she said one night, her voice soft but filled with concern. You keep saying you've seen things, but what am I supposed to do with that? You're not the same person you were before. You're becoming someone I don't recognize. I could see the fear in her eyes, and it tore me apart. I wanted to reach out to her to tell her that I hadn't changed, that I was still the man she had married. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I wasn't the same. The man she knew had been shaken to the core by what I had seen, and I didn't know if I could ever go back to who I was before. "Sarah, I'm not asking you to understand," I said, my voice shaking with the weight of everything I had yet to say. "I don't even understand it myself, but what I saw, it's real, and I can't ignore it." Her eyes softened, but the worry was still there, just beneath the surface. "I want to believe you, Ethan, but you're pushing everyone away. You're pushing me away." I didn't know how to fix that. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't undo the vision. All I knew was that it had changed everything, and I was afraid it was tearing us apart. The struggle with David was no better. Every time we spoke, I felt a distance growing between us, a space that had never been there before. He would tell me to stop talking about it, to let it go, and I couldn't. I couldn't pretend like everything was okay when it wasn't. But every time I tried to share what I was feeling, his response was always the same: disbelief, frustration, and a sense of abandonment. "Look, Ethan, I don't know what's going on with you, but you can't just keep running away from reality," David said one afternoon. "You think you're being chosen for something big, but all you're doing is throwing everything away. Your family, your faith. You're turning your back on everything we've known." His words stung more than I expected. I had tried so hard to hold on to everything: my friends, my family, the life I had known, but it was slipping through my fingers. The truth I had been shown was bigger than any of us could comprehend, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't real just to keep the peace. The tension didn't stop there. Pastor John had reached out to me, but I could tell that even he was beginning to question what I was saying. He was careful with his words, trying to be gentle, but I could sense the doubt in his voice. "You need to be sure about this, Ethan," he told me one evening. "You need to pray. If this vision is truly from God, then He will give you the strength to follow it. But be careful. People will question you, and it will be hard. Don't let this tear you apart." I didn't know how to explain it to him. How could I? How could I tell him that the world was falling apart, that the truth had been revealed to me, but I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it? How could I find peace when everything around me was in chaos? I began to question myself more and more. Was I really seeing what I thought I was seeing? Was this a test, or was I just losing my mind? Every time I spoke to someone, I felt a deepening divide between me and the world I had once belonged to. I didn't know where this journey would lead, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The truth had been revealed, and I had to find my way through it, even if it meant losing everything I had ever known. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself sinking deeper into a chasm of uncertainty. The vision, the dark figure, and the words that echoed in my mind, they never left. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I could see the world in a way I never had before. But the more I saw, the more I realized how little I understood. I had glimpsed something far beyond my comprehension, and I was now walking a path I wasn't sure I could handle. Sarah, despite her initial shock, had softened in the past few days. She still didn't fully understand, but I could see her struggling to reconcile her love for me with the fear that gripped her. She would ask questions, but they were always the same, questions I couldn't answer. "Ethan, do you believe it's all going to end? Do you believe the things you saw are real?" I tried to explain, but the words failed me. I had seen the destruction of the world, the unraveling of everything I knew, but it felt too surreal to articulate. It wasn't something I could explain in simple terms. It was a truth that transcended time and space, something that had been hidden for so long that no one was prepared for it. Even now, when I tried to speak about it, I was filled with a strange sense of doubt. Could this really be happening? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? One evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, I decided to take another walk, hoping for some clarity, hoping for a moment of peace. As I walked through the quiet streets, I passed by an old bookstore that had been there for as long as I could remember. Something about it felt different tonight, almost as if it was calling me in. The lights inside were dim, but there was a flicker of movement that caught my eye. I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. The shopkeeper, a wiry old man with a long gray beard, looked up as I entered. He didn't say anything at first, just studied me with piercing eyes. There was something about his gaze that made my heart race. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. His clothes were old-fashioned, as if he had stepped out of another time entirely. "You're here because you're lost," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "You've seen the truth, and it's more than you can bear. But don't worry, you're not alone in this." I froze, the air around me thick with a sense of foreboding. How did he know? How could he know what I had seen? "You know what's coming," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "And there's nothing you can do to stop it. But you must prepare. You must seek out the answers before it's too late." My heart pounded as I tried to gather my thoughts. "Who are you? How do you know what I've seen?" The man smiled faintly, as if amused by my confusion. "I've been waiting for you. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But your path is important. The things you saw are true, and there are others who can help you understand what's next." Before I could ask another question, he turned and gestured to a stack of old books on a nearby table. "Find what you need here," he said, and then, without another word, he walked to the back of the store, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, stunned, as the weight of his words sank in. This man, this stranger, had just confirmed everything I had been struggling to accept. What I had seen was real. The world was on the brink of something catastrophic, and I was somehow part of it. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out what this man knew. I had to understand what was coming before it was too late. I picked up one of the books from the table. As my fingers touched the worn cover, I felt a strange surge of energy, as if I were meant to find this very book. I didn't know what it held, but I knew it would change everything. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the words of the mysterious bookstore owner. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." He had spoken with such certainty, as if he had known everything about me and my journey. But I couldn't stop thinking about the book. There was something about it, something about what I'd felt when I touched the cover, that told me it wasn't just an ordinary book. It was a key to understanding what was happening, to understanding what I had seen in my vision. The days that followed were filled with sleepless nights, reading the book over and over. It was a strange mixture of scripture, prophecy, and accounts from people who had gone through what I was experiencing. Some of them were stories of near-death experiences. Others were visions of the end of the world. As I read, a deeper understanding began to form in my mind, a vision of things that hadn't yet happened, but were about to. But the more I learned, the more the tension between me and Sarah grew. She had noticed the change in me, the hours I spent with the book, the distant look in my eyes. She tried to talk to me, to understand what was happening, but the more I shared, the more confused and fearful she became. "You're scaring me, Ethan," she said one night, her voice trembling. "You're not the man I married anymore. What happened to you?" I knew she was scared, but I didn't know how to reassure her. I couldn't go back. I had seen too much. I had seen the truth of what was coming, and there was no turning back from it. I tried to explain, to make her understand, but my words felt hollow. She wanted the old Ethan, the man who could joke, who could be present. But I wasn't that man anymore. And every time I tried to talk to her about it, she pulled away more. "It's not that I don't believe you," she said, tears in her eyes. "But this is too much. I don't know how to handle it. I don't know how to help you when I don't even know what's going on in your head." I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her everything, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear to drag her into this, into the overwhelming burden I was carrying. And so I withdrew, hoping that time would somehow bring her back to me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just time I needed. I needed answers. I needed to know what this all meant, and I needed to find people who could help me make sense of it. That's when David came to me again. He had been distant for weeks, but something in his expression had changed. His anger had softened, replaced with something else, an understanding, or at least an attempt at one. "Ethan," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, "I don't know what you're going through, but I've seen it too. The same thing you saw. I didn't get a vision like you did, but I can feel it. The world is changing, and maybe we're meant to do something about it." I stared at him, stunned. "You saw it too?" I whispered. "I didn't see what you did, but I know something is coming. I've been praying about it. I can't ignore it any longer. Maybe we need to figure this out together. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this after all. David was always the practical one, the one who grounded me when I felt lost. But now, it seemed like he was starting to believe in something bigger than the world we had always known. Together, we began to dive deeper into the book, piecing together the mysteries it held. But even as we uncovered more, the tension in my life only grew. Sarah remained distant, unsure of how to handle what I had become. The church community was starting to take notice as well. Pastor John had called me in for a meeting, his face serious and worried. "Ethan, I've heard some things," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you've been going through something, but this path you're on, it's not what we teach. You need to be careful. You're straying from the truth." His words felt like a blow to my chest. I had always trusted Pastor John, but now I felt as though the very foundation of my beliefs was crumbling. Was I really straying from the truth, or was this journey, as painful as it was, the path I was meant to follow? I didn't have the answers, but what I did know was that I had to keep going. The more I learned, the more the urgency grew. I could feel something shifting, a ripple in the fabric of the world. The final days were coming, and I had to be ready. It was the night everything changed. Up until that point, the tension had been building, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The conflicts with Sarah, David, and the church had been simmering under the surface, each moment threatening to explode into something far greater. But this, what happened that night, was the moment I realized there was no going back. Sarah and I had another argument. This time, it was worse. She was scared, her fears evident in every word she spoke. She wanted me to come back to her, to be the man I used to be, but I couldn't. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore, the knowledge that had been thrust upon me. She could see it in my eyes, the distance that had grown between us. There was no pretending anymore. "I'm losing you, Ethan," she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "You're not the same person. You don't even talk to me like you used to. What happened to the man who loved me? What happened to us?" I had no answer. I felt it too, the distance between us, the vast chasm that had formed because I couldn't be who I used to be. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that I still loved her, that nothing had changed. But how could I? How could I tell her that the man she had married had been irreversibly altered by the vision, by the truth that now consumed me? "Sarah, I'm still here," I said, my voice low, almost broken. "But I can't pretend that nothing's happening. I can't ignore what I've seen. The world, it's changing. The end is coming, and I don't know how much time we have left." She recoiled, as if I had slapped her. "What are you saying, Ethan? Are you telling me that everything we've built, everything we've worked for, is meaningless? Is that it? That I should just accept this new version of you and follow you down this path?" The desperation in her voice twisted something deep inside me. I had never wanted to hurt her, but in that moment, I felt as though I was being torn in two. On one side, I wanted to hold on to her, to save our relationship. On the other, I knew that the path I was on was leading me somewhere far beyond what either of us could understand. "I don't know what else to do, Sarah," I whispered, my heart aching. "I can't go back. I can't unsee what I saw." Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned away, unable to look at me any longer. I stood there, frozen, feeling like I was losing her, and that was when David called. He had been distant for weeks, but now his voice sounded different, more urgent. "Ethan, meet me at the church. Now." I didn't hesitate. I knew something was happening. I grabbed my coat and left, walking through the cold night, each step heavier than the last. When I arrived, I found David standing by the front doors, his face pale, his expression grim. "What's going on?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. "I've been doing some research," David said, his voice trembling, "and I found something. It's about the vision you saw. It's not just some random prophecy or coincidence. It's real. There's evidence of what's coming, but it's worse than we thought." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, a knot tightening in my chest. What did he mean? What had he found? "We've been looking at the wrong thing," David continued. "The vision you had, it's not just about the end times. It's not just about the destruction of the earth. It's about something bigger, something we're all part of." My head was spinning. "What do you mean?" What are you saying? David took a deep breath as though gathering his strength. I think we're part of a bigger plan. You were chosen for this, for whatever's coming. And it's not just a spiritual awakening. There's more to it, Ethan. I think we're meant to help others see it before it's too late. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. What had seemed like an isolated experience, something personal and terrifying, was actually a calling, a responsibility I didn't want but couldn't escape. My life was no longer just about me. It was about the world, about the people who needed to see the truth before it was too late. But just as the weight of David's words sank in, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Pastor John. I've been listening to you both, he said, his voice cold and steady. And I think it's time we talked. Ethan, David, you're both right. What's happening is real, but you're not ready for it. None of us are. His words sent a chill through me. The man who had once been my spiritual guide was now speaking in a way I hadn't expected, distant, as though he too had been touched by the truth but was afraid of it. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, you've been shown the truth, Pastor John said, his voice low. But it's not the whole truth. There's more you need to see, more you need to understand before you can truly comprehend what's coming. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I had thought I understood the vision. I had thought I knew what was happening. But now, with Pastor John's admission, I realized that everything was much more complex than I could have ever imagined. Everything was leading towards something bigger than I had ever feared, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. The days after that meeting felt like a blur, but I knew something had shifted. The world had become a much more dangerous place, not just physically, but spiritually. I had always believed in God, but now I realized I hadn't truly understood what that meant. Not until I saw the things I did in my near-death experience. Not until I realized that the truth, the one I had glimpsed, was far beyond my comprehension. Pastor John had warned me that there was more to it, but the deeper I looked, the more questions arose. I could feel the pressure mounting, an unseen weight pressing down on me. I couldn't stop searching, couldn't stop diving into the words in the book, the scriptures, the prophecies. And each time I thought I understood something, it led me to another question, another revelation that was too big to grasp in its entirety. One evening, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the pages. The familiar hum of the world outside felt distant, almost irrelevant. My mind was racing. There was no stopping it. My thoughts were consumed with the coming end. The words of the man in the bookstore, the visions I'd seen, the conversations with David and Pastor John, they all swirled together, creating a whirlwind that was impossible to escape. Then my phone rang. It was Sarah. I almost didn't pick up, but something inside urged me to answer. I hadn't heard from her in days. The last conversation we'd had, well, it hadn't gone well. But now, I couldn't ignore her, not after everything. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling. I've been thinking about everything, and I don't know what's happening, but I can't lose you. I can't live without you. Her words hit me like a hammer. I had been so absorbed in what I had seen, in the overwhelming burden of the vision, that I hadn't realized how much I had pushed her away. The woman I loved was suffering, torn apart by the distance I had put between us. She didn't understand what was happening to me, but she wanted to. She wanted to be with me, even if it meant walking into the unknown. I don't want to lose you either, Sarah, I whispered, my voice raw. But I don't know if I can keep pretending that things are the way they were. I can't ignore the truth anymore. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, filled with a tenderness I hadn't heard in days. Then let me help you. Let me walk with you through this. I don't understand, but I want to. I want us to face this together, whatever it is. Her words hit me hard, harder than anything I had felt before. I had been so focused on the weight of the truth, on the burden of what I had seen, that I hadn't considered the people who still cared about me. Sarah was willing to walk into the unknown, to face the storm with me. I don't know if I can be the man I was, I said, my voice breaking, but I'll try. For you. We sat in silence for a long moment, both of us grappling with the enormity of what I had been through, what I was about to face. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but something told me it was important. I walked to the door and opened it to find David standing there. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and urgency. "Ethan, you need to come with me. Right now." I didn't ask questions. There was something in David's face, in his tone, that told me this was it. This was the moment we had all been dreading. We left the apartment without a word to Sarah. She was still on the phone, but I didn't have time to explain. David led me down the dark streets, his hand gripping my shoulder with an intensity that told me he knew something I didn't. When we arrived at the church, Pastor John was waiting for us. He looked different. His usual calm demeanor was gone. There was something in his eyes that sent a chill through my spine. "It's happening," Pastor John said, his voice tight. "The time is almost here. We need to act. You're the one who's seen it. You're the one who has to prepare." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had always looked to Pastor John for guidance, but now I wasn't so sure. The truth was becoming too much for any of us to handle. "Prepare for what?" I asked, the words leaving my mouth without thought. "We don't have much time," Pastor John replied. "The world is heading toward reckoning, and we have to be ready. We can't just sit here and wait. We have to act before it's too late." At that moment, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The visions, the warnings, the cryptic messages, all of it was real. The final days were coming, and it was my responsibility to share the truth, to prepare those around me. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't do this alone. Looking at David and Pastor John, I knew that they were right. The time to act was now. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, and I would have to make decisions that would change everything. But it was the only path left to take. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew I had to move forward. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blending into the next, each one more intense than the last. The urgency of what Pastor John had said echoed in my mind constantly. The time is almost here. We need to act. But how? What was I supposed to do with this knowledge, with these visions that seemed to grow clearer and clearer every day? And more importantly, who would listen? I had spent so much time consumed by fear, by doubt, but now something inside me was starting to shift. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about the end of the world. It was about redemption. It was about awakening. It was about showing the world what I had seen and giving others the chance to see it too. I didn't know how to begin or where to turn, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. Sarah had stayed with me through it all. Even after everything, she didn't pull away. She was a beacon of light in my life, her love and commitment reminding me of who I had been before all of this. But the distance was still there, and I could see the wariness in her eyes. She wanted to understand, but she was also afraid of what it might mean for her life, for us. We hadn't spoken in depth about the visions in days. She had her own doubts, and I had my own burdens to carry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out at the darkened world outside. My mind was a storm of thoughts, each one crashing against the other. And then it happened. The vision came again. It wasn't like before. This time, I wasn't just a spectator, I was a part of it. I was in the scene, surrounded by chaos and light, by the presence of something greater than myself. There were angels, yes, angels, standing tall in the midst of the destruction. I saw people, broken and crying, searching for answers. And then, in the center of it all, stood a figure I could barely describe, but I knew who it was: Jesus Christ. His presence radiated peace, but also a deep sorrow. I felt the sorrow of the world in his eyes, the sins, the pain, the suffering. It was all before him, and yet he was offering something that could bring healing to those who sought it. I was being drawn closer to him, and in that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. He said, his voice reverberating in my soul, "Tell them what you have seen. The time is near, but I am here to save. Tell them, Ethan, you cannot stay silent any longer." I awoke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. I was drenched in sweat, but I was no longer afraid. I knew what I had to do. The truth was clear. I was being called to share what I had seen, to prepare others for what was to come. This was no longer just about my redemption. It was about salvation for others. It was about giving hope in a time when everything seemed hopeless. I knew the consequences. I had seen them. The world would not listen. People would reject the truth, even if it meant their salvation. But I also knew there would be some who would hear the call, who would recognize the truth when it was spoken. They needed me, and more importantly, they needed him. I grabbed my phone and dialed David. He answered on the first ring. "It's time," I said, my voice steady. "I know what I need to do. I can't keep this inside. We have to tell people. We have to prepare for them." David was silent for a long moment. "Are you sure?" he asked. "You know this is going to cost you everything. Your family, your friends, everything." "I know," I said, the weight of those words settling over me. "But I can't ignore it anymore. This isn't about me anymore. This is about everyone else. The time is coming. The end isn't just near, it's already here. And I have to warn them." The decision was made. There was no turning back now. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent, if I ignored the truth that had been so clearly revealed to me. I would face rejection, mockery, even hatred, but I had to. The truth had to be shared. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of calm wash over me, like I had just taken the first step on a path that had been laid out before me long ago. There was no more fear, no more doubt. I was ready. I walked to the living room where Sarah was sitting on the couch waiting for me. She looked up as I entered, her eyes searching mine, waiting for me to speak. "Sarah," I said, my voice filled with conviction, "I have to go. I have to tell the world what I've seen, what I know. I have to warn them." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no fear in her gaze, just understanding. "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'll be with you, every step of the way." And with that, I knew. I had made the hardest decision of my life, but I had made it. And the path ahead, though uncertain, was the only path that mattered. The road to the truth, the road to salvation, had begun. I couldn't stop now. The days following my decision were like a fever dream. Each moment was a blur, each second filled with tension, anticipation, and uncertainty. I had made the choice to step into the unknown, to follow the path that had been laid before me by something far greater than myself. The world I once knew seemed so distant, so insignificant now, as I set my eyes on a new horizon. The first place I went was the church. It felt like the only place where I could still find any sense of peace, any connection to what I was trying to understand. As I entered, the doors closed behind me with a soft thud, and the silence that enveloped me felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Pastor John was there, waiting for me, his expression serious. He knew what had been weighing on me. I could see it in the way he stood, in the way his hands gripped the Bible in front of him. "You're ready?" he asked, his voice low but full of resolve. I could tell he wasn't just asking about my physical readiness. He was asking if I was truly ready to face everything that would come next. "I'm ready," I said, though I couldn't shake the anxiety in my chest. The decision to go public, to share what I had seen, what I had been shown, was no small thing. I wasn't just risking my reputation, I was risking my entire life, but I had no choice. "Then let's do this," Pastor John replied, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and fear. It was as though he knew what I was about to do would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone who heard it. I stood at the front of the church, the lights dimmed, the congregation gathered in silence. I could feel their eyes on me, some curious, some skeptical, some full of judgment. But I didn't care anymore. I had already seen the truth, and I had already felt the pull to share it. "Brothers and sisters," I began, my voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "I have seen something that I can't keep to myself anymore. I have seen the end of days, and I have seen the salvation that is waiting for all of us if we turn to Him. I died, and I saw the truth, and I'm here to tell you that the time is now. Jesus Christ is coming, and He is calling all of us to prepare." The room was still. The silence felt thick, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then something happened. A woman in the front row, someone I didn't know, began to sob uncontrollably. Her tears fell like rain, her body shaking with grief and fear. I knew, in that moment, that she was hearing the truth, that she understood what I was saying wasn't just a warning, it was a plea for salvation. She wasn't the only one either. I could see the emotions begin to stir in the room. Some people were fighting it, shaking their heads, not ready to hear what I was telling them. Others were gripped with fear, their eyes wide, their hands trembling. And at that moment, it wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about my experience or what I had seen. It was about the truth of Jesus Christ, the truth of redemption and salvation. The weight of it all crashed over me, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had seen the truth, and I knew that whatever happened, I had to stand firm. Jesus had shown me the way. He had revealed to me what was coming, and I had no choice but to follow him. The congregation was split. Some were drawn in by the power of the message, while others sat frozen, unwilling to accept what I was saying. The world was divided, just as I had seen in my visions, but there were those who would listen. There were those who would see the truth for themselves, just as I had. As the service ended and the people slowly filed out, I stayed behind, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just happened. I had taken the first step, but I knew this was just the beginning. There was more work to be done, more people to reach, more souls to save. But then, as I was about to leave, Sarah walked up to me, her face bathed in the glow of the dim church light. "I believe you," she said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "I don't understand it all, but I believe you, and I'll stand by you, whatever comes next." And in that moment I realized something powerful, that love, faith, and truth could conquer anything, even the darkest moments, even the hardest of journeys. The road ahead was still uncertain, still filled with challenges, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I had found the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days following that moment in the church were a whirlwind. The reactions, the conversations, the questions, everything was intense. Some people embraced the truth, while others rejected it entirely. I faced anger, confusion, and even ridicule from those who couldn't or wouldn't see what I had seen. But there were others, scattered like seeds in a storm, who took my words to heart. They came to me in private, their eyes filled with gratitude and a deep yearning for something more. They too had seen what I had seen. Jesus had shown them the truth. Through it all, Sarah remained by my side. She never wavered. Even when the world seemed to be unraveling around us, she was my anchor, my source of comfort. There were nights when the weight of the world seemed unbearable, when I doubted whether I was truly prepared for the path I had chosen. But every time, Sarah's quiet strength reminded me that I wasn't alone, and that was all I needed to keep going. I had gone from a man uncertain of his faith, lost in the world, to someone who had seen the truth with his own eyes. The visions, the experiences, the presence of Christ, they had transformed me. I was no longer the same person. I had been broken, but through that brokenness, I had been made whole. As I look back on everything, I see how far I've come. I see the love and grace of Jesus in every step, in every person I've met along the way. I see how the world around me is changing, how people are waking up, seeing the signs, and starting to understand that there is something more. There is hope in this world. There is redemption, and that is the message I carry now. There are still moments of fear, moments of doubt. The path ahead is uncertain, and I know I will face more challenges. But now I understand that these challenges are part of the journey. They are part of my transformation, my calling. I may never be able to fully explain the visions I saw or the truth I experienced, but I don't need to. The fact that I saw it, that I know it, and that I am living it, that is enough. I stand here today, a living testimony to the power of God's love and grace. Jesus has shown me the way. He has shown me what lies ahead. And now I walk with him, knowing that my journey is far from over. To anyone watching this, reflect on your own journey. Ask yourself, what do you believe? What truths are you willing to embrace? The road ahead may not be easy, but it is the only road that leads to salvation, and it is a road worth walking. If this story resonated with you, if it made you question your own beliefs, or sparked something deep inside of you, I invite you to reflect on your path. If you want to know more, if you want to find hope in the darkness, please subscribe, share this video, and join me in the journey of faith. We're not alone. Jesus is with us every step of the way. Reflect on the story's themes and think about how your own spiritual journey might align with the lessons learned here. If you're ready to embrace the truth, to walk with Jesus, I invite you to subscribe and stay connected as we continue to explore the road to redemption and salvation together. Let's walk this path together.